record, should be recording. All right, go ahead.
Well, thanks everybody for that round of applause. Christine is the founder and president of Plant 5 for Life, a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, whose work primarily supports land regeneration through a systems thinking approach catalyzed by tree planting. Christine is an accredited planner with the American Institute of Certified Planners. She earned her bachelor's from SUNY College of Environmental Sciences and Forestry and a master's in landscape architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, where Christine also proposed and completed the first dual degree master's curriculum in natural resources management. Her prior experience includes working on challenges at various scales in the nonprofit, private, and governmental sectors in the US and abroad, including the design of green roofs and rain gardens, municipal town planning, and regional planning for a national biosphere reserve. Christine always makes time for education and has been a critic, lecturer, and adjunct at elementary, high schools, and universities, including Carnegie Mellon University. She freelance writes for various publications, including Pittsburgh's Public Source. As a lifelong advocate for women and public health, Christine continues to serve as a doula when time allows. The pandemic has given rise to a whole host of unexpected new skills for Christine, from virtual school overseer to drywall repairwoman to ice cream maker and dog trainer. Stay tuned for 2021 post-pandemic bio. It may be unrecognizable. So I've been looking forward to Christine's talk, and with that, take it away.
Thank you, Dexter. Thanks, Kinsey. Also a fellow UPenn alum, I believe. Okay, here we go. I want to ask just a quick piece of business. I am the host here, so on Zoom, so I'm still getting people trying to come into the participant to the waiting room, but once I start play, this the box is still up, and
do you want to make me or Kinsey, this might be my first act as co-chair, a co-host, and then I can let people in?
I think that would be a good idea.
And I think that gives me access to, do you know how to do that?
I do. Okay. I think I have the right David, if this doesn't go to you.
He, him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to close the participant box before I start.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our organization, which is fairly new, 2 years old now. I am also going to give you a little bit of background on myself as the founder and my story, because a lot of what we do at Plant 5 for Life is give the opportunity for story from birth for children and families. Our mission is an evolving one, but as stated now, it's to connect children and families with nature from birth. You can read on the screen here, our first program aimed to give trees to every child born in collaboration with our healthcare community, matching trees to sites nearest each child's neighborhood. And we hold a vision of environmental equity close to our hearts, connection and supportive community health services drive our work. We are a small group, and we're located usually in a co-working center here in Pittsburgh for our office space. It's a new sort of startup entrepreneurial hub, and we are the only, maybe the second environmental organization in that space. So it seeds us with lots of different perspectives from all different industries, which we like quite a bit. But right now, everyone is working essentially from home. We maintain a storage space for our materials and we have a farm collaboration locally for our living plants. So when I give presentations, I normally speak about why we do what we do from a scientific point of view, from an ecological point of view, and from a community engagement point of view. I'd like to try something different for today. As I mentioned, to tell you a bit of my story as a founder. You know, I often get this question, how did you get this idea? Why did you start it? What is your story? Or alternately, why? Because my background is, my last degree work was in landscape architecture and natural resource management. Why aren't you working for the government? Why aren't you working in a design office? What possessed you to start a nonprofit organization? So, at risk of boring you to death and feeling slightly vulnerable because I don't often like to talk about myself, I'm going to just go through 6 to 8 slides very quickly to give you a snapshot of how I come at this, what my perspective is on this work, and how I got here. And in asking myself this, you know, I think it ties very well into what we often want everyone who participates in our program to ask, which is, what is your first nature memory, and how did you connect to your first landscape? So maybe as I'm speaking, you can keep that in mind a little bit about yourselves and share out at the end. Love to hear some of your story. So mine began not in a forested landscape similar to what surrounds us here in Pittsburgh, but in the New York area, surrounded by little patches of nature, and often none at all. A lot of concrete. My very first memory is actually of a small stone that I found that was not concrete under while playing on the street in Queens when I was about, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 5. You know, moving out to Long Island, I had some greater landscapes to explore. One of the first being the Nature Conservancy's property near my high school, where mostly they were conserving a meadow landscape, and there was a small woodland patch of trees where I spent a lot of time trying to identify plants on my own and hanging out in and under a tree. I was the nerdy plant girl in school. You know, I didn't grow up in an environment where I had family and friends who enjoyed deep nature experiences. So a part of me really craved that. And when I had the opportunity when I was 16, going all the way back to that age, I had a very pivotal experience, one which I didn't quite realize how significant it was until I began the work at Plant 5, with Plant 5. I had a month and a half long immersion experience through an outward bound program in Maine on the Machias River, where we basically lived in tents. We made our way through portages and down the river to the Atlantic Ocean. And the most memorable part of that was having that, you know, full sensory experience and then coming upon a clear cut. We were running, we were jogging one morning and wandered into something like what you see here on the right. And it was a trauma in retrospect. It was a real shock. I remember the absolute silence that came with it. We went from an environment rich in sound, bird life, to nothing. And I think that moment changed the whole trajectory of my interests. I went on to, as Dexter mentioned, study at the State College of Environmental Science and Forestry. I was trying to understand what our ecosystems did and how we were essentially destroying them or conserving them. And I had the interesting experience of learning from Dr. John Todd, who is a biologist who at the time had pioneered some of the early work in combining technology and ecology to create living machines. Living machines essentially treat polluted water through a cascading series of trophic systems. It's something that has been applied in wastewater management, but back then we were also able to experiment with freshwater remediation. I interned with them for 2 summers and ended up working with them for a year and a half after college, and went on to, from there, with their help, to work and study at a place called Schumacher College, where I was exposed to a similar notion that landscapes can really be restored and catalyze change. I had the opportunity to study with someone named Wes Jackson, who you may have heard of. He runs, or ran, the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, where he was pioneering the hybridization of grain crops to perennialize them, to stabilize soils, and restore ecosystems. The thinking that I was exposed to at Schumacher College really deepened my understanding of regeneration. And what I kept finding, however, that was missing was the community piece, community engagement. And I sought out additional learning through graduate school, where I had the opportunity to study not with someone who combined landscape and technology per se, or ecology, and to a catalyzing end, but instead really looked deeply at how design and nature work together to engage community. It was very system scale level thinking. And this is a picture of the High Line here that you're seeing on the bottom in New York City. That was designed by James Corner of Field Operations, a landscape architect who studied under Ian McHarg, who some of you might know from his systems ecology work and landscape architectural thinking. So, you know, I ended up in New York City at the end of the day. And like Dexter mentioned, I worked at different scales. I began working on green roofs. I managed this project here on the Museum of Modern Art. It was the last green roof project that I chose to work on. It was actually made of all artificial materials. It was not, I mean, for the most part, it did a good job of managing stormwater and brought a lot of beauty from, you know, from upper views, different building perspectives. But it did nothing from, you know, from a living landscape point of view. At that point, I shifted to work at a different scale, which is the Biosphere Reserve in the Pinelands. And there I really got to understand what it means to work with communities and neighborhoods and municipalities. My path took me to, again, abroad after that. I was a consultant on a variety of projects, a bit of a trailing spouse, to be honest. My husband was working abroad in Israel, and I had the opportunity there to work on a project with EcoPeace. Back then they were called Friends of the Earth. And this is a picture of the Jordan River on the left here. On one side are the Palestinian territories, and on the other side Israel. And it was a fascinating project because here again was a landscape that, an ecosystem that was being restored with the goal of community engagement on both sides. So the landscape was the conflict mediator here. And the goal in the restoration project was to bring more environmental equity and environmental justice to particularly the Palestinian community, but to also build ties that essentially would be sustainable over the long run. And then I ended up in Pittsburgh here, and I'm almost done with my story, but I find it interesting as I was putting this together, thinking about how, you know, Pittsburgh doesn't have, of course, the political conflict that you might find in the Middle East, but along the Jordan River, but you know, our river has the potential to join communities and neighborhoods as well through restoration. So here is my son. He, he changed my life as I arrived in Pittsburgh not long after. And I mention him, give him a moment here, because I think that, you know, as we meet communities and families through our work at Plant 5, one of the repeating patterns, the continuing dialogue, something I hear no matter where we go is, I'm interested in this work because I'm a mom. I'm interested in this work because I'm a parent. I didn't care about the environment until my child was born. So I you know, don't like to mix work and personal too much, but I think this this little guy may represent something meaningful of the community members we work for in their lives. My final story slide. After being a mom to my son for a few years, I had the opportunity to visit something that had been on my bucket list for ages. This is called Gaviotas. It's in Colombia, and it's also it's a story about how tree planting catalyzed significant change in a community, a landscape, and a political system. This used to be a barren llano, a plain that had very few trees on it, could not sustain much life, could not sustain much community or infrastructure. And a man named Paulo Lugari went here and planted 11,000 hectares eventually since the 70s in forested landscape. And it was a story we're all familiar with. He planted a few trees. It took a while to find ones that would take. He had to go back in time to the to when Colombia's forests were connected to Panama, and chose the Caribbean pine to try to revitalize the landscape there. It took very well, and what followed was bird life, ground cover, understory, and increased humidity in the air. People were willing to stay put and build the bones of essentially a small village there. They learned to tap the trees for resin products and built a factory on site, which began supplying turpentine products and other, I think they had 7 products total, back to the city of Bogota. They were heralded as example of sustainable living by the UN, I think, in the 80s. anyway, I realized that the spirit of that place was what I, wanted to really focus my energies on. I guess bringing to my own community going forward. I had worked at all these different scales and in different environments, government, the nonprofit sector, academia, and I came to still feel that one of the most powerful things anyone could do is to plant a tree and to do so very intentionally, with a whole systems approach. I did a lot of tree planting with my son. We did a lot of planting through the wonderful Tree Vitalize program here in Pittsburgh. And to this day, he still walks by and calls those trees his trees. These are all the threads that led to the moment of Plant 5. I had this sense that what I'd seen in Colombia could also be true here. It's not a new idea. I think, any kind of community forestry is deploying the same approach, but, at every planting that I'd been to here, I often saw mostly adults, not a whole lot of children, and the audience targets seemed to be an older demographic. So, I really started thinking, what would it take to create a systemic change, a sustainable change over the long term, where there was almost a shift in culture and appreciation of life and the importance of forests and how important they are to our sustenance from a very early age. So this notion that you could plant 5 trees per and then connect people to land and environmental opportunity from birth and lead to a lifelong relationship with nature was essentially born. I went around with a friend at that time who had accompanied me to, I'd really accompanied her because she was Colombian to Gaviotas, and we talked to many people in Pittsburgh, including Tree Pittsburgh, including Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Allegheny Land Trust. In full disclosure, I'm a board director of Allegheny Land Trust. We talked to all of the stakeholders and community partners we could find, and sort of shared this idea out to see if they also thought it might be a good one and how we might implement it. We came to the realization that the hospital environment would be the best delivery partner. That's, of course, when most people enter the world, and where. We were able to talk with UPMC, one of our biggest healthcare providers here, about this idea. And we came up with a way to deliver upon it in a pilot. So we often get asked why 5. I'd like to just say a little bit about that. 5 is a number that in some ways was inspired by that trip to Colombia. At the time, Paulo Ligari was working on basically making it a requirement for every citizen to plant 5 trees in their lifetime. I think they ended up settling on 1 tree with the politicians there in Bogota. But I think now you can't get your license until you've proven that you have planted trees before that time comes. It's also, I think, a requirement to we were thinking about this number 5 and ran some calculations with Tom Crothor, who is, you know, a Yale scientist who's leading some of the discussion around tree planting and reforestation as a effective climate solution. He's done some really pivotal work in that area. I'm sure you've heard of him, but if you haven't, it's definitely worth looking at his papers. He's also one of our board directors, I should mention. Anyway, you know, 5 trees for every child born between now and the next 40 years would help restore our tree canopy globally to what it was before human civilization got started on it. So, you know, that's a pretty powerful number, and all things would have to align for it to work like that. But that was just some fun we were having with numbers. But it, you know, 5 is a meaningful number around the world. Children are vulnerable until the age of 5 from a whole host of environmental factors, not necessarily in the, you know, United States and more developed countries, but in places where, you know, clean water is for drinking is more of an issue, and so forth. And then there are 5 key ways that we see trees contributing to our lives, and we call those out as cleaning our air, cleaning our water, providing food, cooling our landscapes and homes, and creating community gathering spaces. So what you're looking at here is a postcard, essentially. This is the back of a postcard that went into discharge packets at McGee Women's Hospital, which births the most children in our region every year. And they birth about 10 to 11,000. The difference is made up by other hospitals. This postcard went into their discharge packet, and they were encouraged to go to our website, join with us to sign up for a planting day celebration that we would then notify them of. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. We found our first site. Initially, we wanted to match these trees that we gave and those who showed up for the celebration to the communities where children were born, where they were living. We found that over 70% went back to Allegheny County after birthing at McGee Hospital. So, you know, that was our sort of pie in the sky goal. We didn't find that it was very easy to start with that. That, you know, could get interesting and become more and more possible as we plant more and more trees and give to more and more children. With the way that we had been thinking about it then, scale would be helpful for that sort of approach. But for the first planting, we raised some seed capital, and we decided to seed funding, and we decided to essentially partner with an entity that would allow us to plant 5,000 trees in one location. This is a very central location in Pittsburgh for people coming from all parts of Allegheny County, and it had the ability to allow us to have a planting site, as well as do quite a few trees, plant quite a few trees all at once, to understand some of the challenges and constraints that we might be facing for bigger sites, as well as to have a family day celebration on the site. So a lot of things aligned. We chose this site. It's an old mine site. Pittsburgh Botanic Garden has taken over 400 acres of land in an Allegheny County park here, and is converting it into a sort of a native outdoor botanic garden. The mine reclamation portion of it is what funds their operation. I won't go too much into that, but they had been doing a restoration project on this site for I think 2 years, maybe 3 years before we partnered with them for these 2 seasons where we ended up planting. So they're all bare root, used our dibble bar. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of what this looks like. I'm sure, you know, others here have planted on mine sites before, but these are furrows which were prepared in advance by the by contractors that the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden works with and some of the mine operators. Part of this site is still active. As you can see, the soil is not fantastic. It was amended to some degree prior to planting. And planting occurs in the sides for the most part of the furrows so that the trees don't sit directly in water, but they are able to get to the moisture. All of the trees were sheltered, and this site, which we didn't know at the time when we set this up, but this particular planting site could only host adults. The family celebration was off on a different part of the site where the children were allowed because of the terrain. At the very last minute, the mine operator put the kibosh on children being on this site. So you always, you know, you have your ideal and then life happens. I'm just going to show a few things. This was a really a special group of people that came. It was a combined effort of the Botanic Garden, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and ourselves to bring volunteers to this site. We had groups from corporations, we had individuals from the community, we had patient groups from local smaller hospitals come out, as well as UPMC. Many of the mental health patients are brought to restorative landscape sites to help with their care. And we were happy at this site to be able to also offer hearing impaired services, so sign language. So this is an amazing pair here. They planted more than anybody on the site that day. Our local politician showed up in support. This is the district representative here and a forester from the Bureau of Mining. And as you can see, we started to fill in this gap in the landscape. I was really reminded of that main clear cut when we finished this project. I felt like we filled in a hole that had been in my mind since my story and connection with various landscapes had started. And, you know, I think working to plant trees is also very healing for individuals. And it didn't occur to me until after we were done and I looked back that something that I witnessed that day in Maine had been healed by this effort. So, you know, here are the trees. It was very interesting kind of social mapping, watching where people put them. We gave very loose instructions in terms of, you know, plant 8 feet apart, and people talked and they wove through the site. And it was kind of interesting to see where the clusters showed up, because you could remember that that's where a group started meeting each other and talking and helping one another. So it was really fun to see that evolve. We had a family day celebration set up on the very last day of planting. The families were invited to come. Part of that consisted of really nature-based activities that were designed to introduce families to one another. We created booklets based on their zip codes. When they signed up, we asked for their zip code information that provided resources, pointing them in the direction of environmental and health resources in the community. So, you know, it had everything from, this is where you can find your community gardens, to your local pediatric office, to your outdoor parks and playgrounds. So it's just little handy booklet to orient them to health and environmental resources if it hadn't been brought to their attention before. And then we had this wonderful author show up. That was a pretty, again, you know, life happens. This was the Tree of Life shooting that day, unfortunately, in Pittsburgh, in the synagogue. And we had to cut this Family Day celebration short. But I think it was a really stark reminder of the power of maybe connection and the need for connection. And it was pretty wonderful to be there with people who needed each other in that moment. We had created a little community that that was able to be supportive of one another, even though we had to cut the celebratory aspect short. It gave us a good insight into education, ways to reach out between plantings. So the story time was popular. We continued that with some corporate partners. Patagonia has been a nice supporter of this effort for us. So they let us host a few story time events at their store here in Pittsburgh, and provided, they not only provided food and take-home boxes for the Family Day celebration, but they also provided a gift raffle here, an auction. So that helped us really get the word out about what we're trying to do and bring in kind of the next generation of children. So just not the newly born, but those who are now, you know, listening and actively engaged in. We had the author of Chicka Chicka Boom Boom come. I know also Kinsey's Tree Pittsburgh hosted him as well. We were able to bring some families together for that and communicate about the importance of environment and health, even if they weren't planting in the winter time. We held some events at the hospital itself at UPMC McGee. We wanted to also educate the practitioners, the doctors, the staff, the nursing staff, just in terms of the connection between trees and health, and to get the word out about the program. So McGee let us set up in their dining services area, and during another event, we set up right in the lobby. These are two of our team members here, our board director, and at the time a volunteer. And we also partner here. You see Bartlett, and I'm just going to mention them because, you know, we want to be able to offer ongoing maintenance services to individuals who take these trees home. This was a tree giveaway, I should say. So not only were we having little talks throughout the day for anyone in the hospital to come listen on various topics, the 5 topics that were on that postcard, you know, why trees are cleaning water, how they're doing it, so forth, and how that connects to health. But we gave these trees for everybody to take home. And Bartlett partnered to, you know, on the expense of that, but also showed up to offer maintenance advice and planting advice. So we try to work with people who have expertise that, you know, that can augment our own. So it was busy, very busy. I think we gave away 800 trees or something that day, 600 trees, I don't remember now. And our local politicians showed up. Our local politicians showed up to do a Plant 5 for Life proclamation day that day. So he honored our work, a county councilman, which was great support. Help get the word out. You know, we went from that one site to still wanting to be more intentional at a neighborhood scale. And what we began to do was to outreach to some of the smaller neighborhoods and neighborhood sites that we knew were in need of planting. This next site, as an example, is the Hilltop Urban Farm. It was a federal housing site that had been raised and was now being turned into an urban agriculture site. So we partnered with the Fruit Tree Foundation, with the Hilltop Urban Farm, and the Arbor Day Foundation through Alliance for Community Trees, and Target was a sponsor of this particular event. So they asked us to particularly set up a section of the planting for their families. So they brought their families and children to come and plant, and we planted quite a few hundred fruit trees with them and with local community members and families. We got the word out in this particular case by reaching to local news outlets and other community locations to invite people, and using social media to invite people who lived in the community to plant in honor of their newly born child. So we were sort of experimenting with different ways to reach more people, to engage them. We had a pretty robust family celebration at this one. We had music. It went on all day. Lots of food. It was really lively and fun. And I think people got a lot out of this. We did GPS our trees at this site. At the Botanic Garden, we could only share out the site location in a general way that would bring them to the middle of that forest, which we were okay with, because we really we don't necessarily want to impart ownership, like these trees are yours, but rather these trees are part of a community and an ecosystem, just like you are. And there are cycles of life. And, the nice thing in a way with planting 5 for every child is if one dies, it is not like a 1-for-1, this represents you, that kind of thing. It's really about, this is how a forest works, kind of thing. And so I just mentioned that because this is one site where we were able to GPS all the trees and then share out with each person where their 5 trees were located on the site, and created a story map using GIS, which told the story of the history of the site through maps and photographs. And then they can still click on the trees over time. They can upload their pictures if they go back. If we get additional information about their growth and care, we can record that on site. So each tree has its own little log. We hope to put that to greater use. With COVID, no one is really on that site right now. The idea was to have additional follow-up programming and events that would continue to bring them back, give them incentive to come back and meet with the people they met that very first day, to participate in stewardship events for the trees, to also take part in the food market that occurs here, or will occur as these begin to bear food. So, again, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our neighborhood interests and how we intend to dive in at that scale and connect at that scale. We've always done analysis relative to the areas where we want to engage with community. This is just an example, a really rough example of overlaying stormwater information with food desert boundaries, vacant lot information, and green space. And, that often leads us to identify priority planting sites based on both where we see trees can have the most impact, considering a whole host of environmental needs, but also gives the community something to bounce off of, and then they can communicate which of those sites they would like to plant on, which are a priority to them. This is not associated with the map prior. This is just an example of a different community where we called out some high impact sites after some site analysis. Particularly black carbon analysis is, or mapping is useful. Most people react pretty strongly to seeing where Black carbon concentrations are highest, and often they're in along roadways. So that kind of leads me to where we are now, as we have had to pause with our hospital program and the rollout there due to COVID. We have pivoted a bit, but this was always running in parallel to the work we were doing. We found that priorities expressed by community members often centered around air quality. We have really poor air quality here in Pittsburgh. You may or may not know that. Some of the, we're I think, in the top 8 worst in the country. A lot of that is point source pollution. There are 10 very large polluters that are contributing to that. A number of them are coke works facilities here, but we're also sort of plagued by this topography that we have. It's like a blessing and a curse for us in that we have inversion events where pollutants are trapped low to the ground, and that's where pollution mitigation from around traffic corridors, we believe, becomes meaningful and important. It can potentially alleviate some of the health impacts on adjacent populations, especially if they're vulnerable populations like preschool populations or school-age children populations, elderly, and so forth. So we've always been interested in the work happening in Louisville, Kentucky, and have been in contact with them since very early on, as well as with a contingent of folks here in Pittsburgh who have been following their work for some time. If we have the time, I don't know, I need a time check, I think. Let me just check. Oh, we're very close to the end. So I'm not gonna play this 3-minute video, but if anyone wants to grab that and throw it in the chat, it's a great little video about what they're doing in Louisville. It's the first, I'm sure everyone here knows about it, but it is the first large-scale medical study aiming to quantify the health impacts of planting trees, particularly as it relates to cardiovascular health there. But it will probably have implications in other areas relative to respiratory health and mental health. So we've partnered now for a while with the Breathe Project. This is a fairly new entity here in Pittsburgh, but has been kind of a meta cognitive framer of information on air quality here. They're a great clearinghouse. We've come to understand some of our air quality issues and the challenges and where specifically they are with their assistance. We're now a member of the Breathe Collaborative. It's about 30, I think we're at maybe 20 or 30 now, organizations who are represented, and our work collectively sort of props up the mission of the Breathe Project, and we all help one another to achieve air quality goals. With their help and with the help of the team in Louisville, Kentucky, as well as the Nature Conservancy in Louisville and the most recently the Philadelphia chapter of the Nature Conservancy, as well as with the support of UPMC, we were able to essentially launch what is the first phase of what we're calling GreenHeart Pittsburgh. It will closely align to the goals and the science of the work coming out of Louisville. It was recently seeded with a Clean Air Fund award from the Allegheny County Health Department. And we've done some initial work on that. We've had a stakeholder group meeting with support of the Breathe Collaborative, and we've done some pilot planning with 2 communities, Churchill and Carnegie, and in coordination with 4 other neighborhoods that would like to come into the fold of that pilot, but we're working on funding arrangements right now. So we'll be monitoring air quality with a baseline health data review prior to planting, and then we'll do the same post-planting, similar to what they're doing in Louisville, Kentucky, along a number of traffic corridors in both communities. And we'll be doing ongoing assessments with 6-month benchmarks over a period of 2 to 3 years. We drummed up some excitement with that, even though the contract technically doesn't go into effect until January 1st. But we were able to plant a few hundred trees at a site in Churchill. This is a preschool play yard on a church ground. The church owns quite a bit of property, and it is immediately adjacent to a 4-lane highway. So we, these are not the size trees we'll be planting when we do the GreenHeart project. They'll be much bigger, and it'll be part of a biofilter design that includes understory and grasses and ground covers. But we just wanted to see who would come out and how much engagement there was. We were a little overwhelmed. We anticipated 20 or 30, and we had 100 people. And in COVID, that's difficult to manage. So we really had to separate everyone and move on the fly to safeguard that day. But it's been a really great journey for us, and we're still small. I work completely voluntarily on this project. Other people are paid, not myself. I'm running this in that way. But as we grow, we hope to also grow our team and our relationships and our ability to make a difference in our local environment across generations. So I'm going to stop talking. I'd meant to leave a lot more time for discussion. I'm sorry. I'm a bit long-winded, but thank you.
Thanks, Christine. It was great to hear from you. And thank you also for sharing some of your personal story. I think that's always helpful, excuse me, in understanding how people started into this work and where they're coming from with their organization. So thanks so much. That was a fantastic presentation. I was looking at the chat. There is one question that's down here from Michael Gavin, who is wondering, is Chris Chandler from the Nature Conservancy working with you here in Pittsburgh?
Yes.
Awesome. We have a minute left. If there's one more question that you want to drop in, feel free. And Dexter, if you want to announce next month's presentation. You're muted.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is that
okay? Thanks, Christine.
I said, great talk. I really learned a lot. Thank you for sharing. Next month, we'll be hearing from Maryland Department of the Environment, Carol Ann Barth, Manager of Tree Canopy Programs, Community Outreach Promoting Empowerment, also known as COPE, and she's going to talk about native trees.
I have a question for everyone. If do you ever do that?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just curious if anyone wants to share their experience working with children and families, young children.
Yeah, we are at 11 o'clock, so some people are probably going to have to drop off the call, but if anyone